All righty. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning. Wherever you are watching from around the world, I want to wish you a welcome, a greetings for joining us here live on X and YouTube. My name is Jose Vega. I am a congressional candidate that is running for Congress. Various things happened this week. So let me just put out a disclaimer in the beginning. If this is your first time here, this is something we do every week where we read a story or we have a presentation from Dennis Speed on Edgar Poe or a story by Edgar Poe. We will get to that. And I always start out with a briefing. Now, let me just put something out here. If it is your first time here, but you are not here because of Edgar Poe and you're not here because of my briefing and you're simply here to spread hate, well, I hope you hold on to that comment for a second and decide to listen up and perk up. I will let you send whatever hateful comment you want if you can sit through this entire presentation and also my subsequent appearance at 7 o'clock with Diane Sayre, which is titled From the Bronx to the Bering Strait Tunnel. All right, so with that out of the way, let's just go over a couple of things that have happened this week. Obviously, we had the Davos Forum that took place, that has been, and I think is still taking place in Davos in Switzerland, right? What we've seen come out of that is a couple of things. One is this speech by Mark Carney that people keep talking about and people say that they are impressed by. You know, Glenn Greenwald did some coverage of this talking about, wow, this is great. You know, this is coming out of the mouth of a world leader. And I've seen some other coverage as well of people being surprised that Mark Carney is finally telling the truth. But here's the actual truth. I think out of all of the political commentators that I have seen do coverage of this, the closest person, you know, to not fall for this was Jimmy Dore, who had outlined specifically that Mark Carney has always been a banker. And when people like Mark Carney start talking about the rules-based international order, and when he says verbatim, oh well, you know, it's like we've always known the rules-based international order was a little bit false. And he starts quoting the power of the powerless, this, that, and the other. Jimmy Dore says, don't fall for it. Why? Because they've profited from this system, and Mark Carney was the same people responsible for putting that rules-based international order to begin with, and to put that out and to operate by those standards. Something that people like my current congressional opponent, Richie Torres, who is the current incumbent of this area, also fights for as well, for upholding that rules-based international order, given that he is part of the strategic competition between the United States and CCP. He is part of that committee, as well as on the committee to promote NATO and to ensure that NATO can continue its ugly existence. But beyond that, beyond just calling out the hypocrisy of the bankers who, like Mark Carney and others, who are now starting to sing a different tune, supposedly at Davos, there was something else that was highlighted today by Dennis Small on the International Peace Coalition call. Now, if you don't know what the International Peace Coalition call is, this is something that happens every Friday, which was a program that was initiated by Helga Zepp-LaRouche. They've done over 100 of these programs, over 100 of these meetings every single Friday with different activists, different former world leaders, have former heads of state, former ambassadors, and they just did an EIR, an Executive Intelligence Review Emergency Roundtable last Monday, just recapping, not only what's going on with Venezuela, but the war in Ukraine, and also now what's going on with these discussions in Greenland. It's something I definitely recommend you tune into and get Helga's briefing. And that's something you can check out too, probably tonight after you watch me on Diane Sayre's show. But regardless, Dennis Small made a point here that was missing from the so-called, discussions at Davos, which is this $2.4 quadrillion in derivatives. See, there is a giant economic market bubble that is prime to crash. And not a single one of these people are talking about the obvious. But the truth is, even if they were talking about quadrillion derivatives, 2.4 million quadrillion derivatives, they're missing something essential, which is what is actually an economy. And I will posit to you a proof by Lyndon LaRouche that an economy is not about money. An economy's greatest resource is the human mind and human creativity. It is an investment in its people, in its young people, and in its education. Because any physical reality for people around the world will stem from the minds of its citizens and will stem from the minds of human beings. And it is our responsibility to make sure we cultivate not just living standards for every single human being to live its best possible life, but also cultivate a culture where people can be enriched by some of history's greatest minds and thinkers. That is why we recite and do and read Edgar Poe, and we talk about the history of people like Edgar Poe and their influence, not just on the Bronx, not just in New York, not just in the United States, but for all of mankind. Because we believe in something, that power is not force. Power is ideas. Power is creativity. Real power stems from the mind, not the barrel of a gun. And so with that, that is my introduction and our briefing for today for our weekly Edgar Poe seminar. Let me just get one more thing out of the way. If you wish to support us and donate, we have a very big effort, which is to get me on the ballot. We now have a new button on the website, which actually, can we pull up the website real quick, Kynan? There is a button on the website that says Pledge to Sign. If you are in the 15th Congressional District, you now have the ability to go on our website and pledge to sign day one when we have to start petitioning. This is crucial, given the attacks recently on our campaign and on me personally and what they're going to do for us in the Bronx. It is crucial that we cross our T's and dot our I's and ensure that we get a number of signatures that are valid, because they will try to disqualify us at the ballot box even before we get there. So if you want to help us out and you are in the 15th Congressional District here in the Bronx, and there's a little tool where you can check, please do so. Go to votevega.nyc. And as always, donations are tremendously helpful now than any other point in the campaign, especially as we're gearing up to petition. So without further ado, I now want to transition over to bring in Dennis Speed. So Dennis, are you there?
Yeah, I am here. Are you able to hear me clearly? Am I good?
Yes, I am. Yep, you're good.
All right, well, great. So here's what we're going to do tonight. And I want to thank Jose generally for the introduction he gave, especially the introduction concerning the fight that he finds himself in. It's not him, it's actually everybody. And it's the fight everybody in the United States is finding itself in. That's why a guy like Glenn Greenwald is having the problem he's having, because you see, this is a fight about ideas. It's not a fight about what people think it's about. It's not about flesh and blood. It's about principalities and powers, and they are not necessarily Zionist. They also are not necessarily not. But I cite this because, sometimes what the biggest problem is that people believe on the basis of having honed in on and gotten a good idea about one kind of opposition, they then make the mistake of believing they've now solved the problem of who they're up against. So what this is about and what we do when we talk about these people, Edgar Poe being one, is we're talking about a process of the founding of the United States. A lot of people here, of course, know, and many of you may have had the experience of people telling you, well, the United States was founded on slavery, was founded on racism, was founded on genocide, so forth and so on. They say these things without considering that maybe the United States itself was a battle, and maybe the battle was not the battles that people hear about, the battles of Lexington and Concord, or the Battle of Princeton or Trenton, but that it was a battle after the Revolution, that the major battles went on in the presidency. Nobody considers that, for example, Alexander Hamilton, who was the first Secretary of Treasury, affected and his policies affected the Washington administration and the Adams administration, but that his policies were overthrown by the two Virginians, Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. That was 16 years. It was a reversal of policy. And then the policy was ultimately put back into place by James Monroe, who was also from Virginia, and John Quincy Adams. And then that policy was completely wrecked and destroyed by the next two presidents, Andrew Jackson and Martin Van Buren. Nobody tells that story. Nobody even, some of us know it, but it's not allowed to be told because the notion that there were ideas that were at issue and that the matter of solving the problem of actual freedom was much more complex, not complicated, just complex, and not morally complex, but from the standpoint of actually implementing, creating a successful anti-colonial nation, which is what the battle was about. Yes, the Achilles heel of that was slavery, and that was expressed in the outlook of people like Jefferson, like Madison for that matter, though Madison was a different matter than Jefferson was. They were different. Certainly Hamilton and John Adams, clearly vehemently anti-slavery, as was Hamilton's closest friend, Gouverneur Morris, from the Bronx, particularly from Morrisania, from the South Bronx. So these issues are important. Tonight, what we're going to do is read a story, which is called The Devil and Tom Walker. And it's by an author by the name of Washington Irving. You may never have heard of him. I think we have a picture of him. There he is. He's born in 1783. And Edgar Poe was associated with him. So he's born 1783, which means right at the time that the United States is just won the American Revolution. The Treaty of Paris is signed in 1783, the same year that he's born. So he's born 26 years before Poe, who was born in 1809. He dies in 1759, about 10 years after Edgar Poe. So he both straddles the period between the American Revolution and its end, and the period right up to when the what's called the American Civil War will begin, basically within 2 years of his death. So that's just who he is. I'm not going to put a picture of Edgar Poe up, but what we're going to do is show you a correspondence between them so that this is just clear. So if we can put those up. So this is before September 21st, 1839. This is Poe, this is Washington Irving, writing to Edgar Poe. Edgar Poe is a young writer of the age of 30 years. And he's basically encouraging Poe. He says, I am much pleased with a tale called The House of Usher, the Fall of the House of Usher, actually, and should think that a collection of tales equally well written could not fail of being favorably received. Its graphic effect is powerful. So Poe is 30 years old. Irving is a fully established writer, and we'll get to why in a minute. So that is a correspondence at that time. Let's go to the next one. This is Poe writing right after after he's received that letter. And he says, I take the liberty of sending you, to Washington Irving, the October number of the Gents magazine containing the tale William Wilson. Now, for those who are here for the first time, these are stories both of these are stories that we've read here. So Irving says, this is the tale of which I spoke. Poe says, this is the tale of which I spoke in my former letter, and which is based upon a brief article of your own in the First Gift. That's another magazine. Your article is called An Unwritten Drama of Lord Byron. Okay, so now here's what this is. Washington Irving wrote a story called An Unwritten Drama of Lord Byron. Lord Byron was a British poet who we've also talked about here extensively as being a particular focal point of Poe's attention, Irving's attention, and other Americans' attention because of matters that we won't go into right now. So what Poe is saying is that he based his story on Washington Irving's story. I have hoped that Having thus a right of ownership in my William Wilson, you will be induced to read it, and I also hope that reading it, you will find in it something to approve. My request now, therefore, is that if you approve of William Wilson, you will express so much in your own terms in a letter to myself and permit Messrs. L and B, these are his publishers, to publish it as I mentioned. Okay, submitting to all your kindness, I am with highest respect, Edgar A. Poe, October 12th, 1839. Okay, so let's go to the next one. Irving responds to this and he says, "Dear sir, the magazine you were so kind as to send me, being directed to New York instead of Tarrytown, did not reach me for some time." Washington Irving was born in Manhattan, but then he moved up to Tarrytown where he would die 20 years after he writes this. So he says that's why he didn't get the magazine. This, together with an unfortunate habit of procrastination, must plead my apology for the tardiness of my reply. I have read your little tale of William Wilson with much pleasure. It is managed in a highly picturesque style, and the singular and mysterious interest is well sustained throughout. I repeat what I have said in regard to a previous production which you did me the favor to send, that I cannot but think a series of articles of like style and merit would be extremely well received by the public. With best wishes for your success, I am, my dear sir, yours respectfully, Washington Irving. And finally, in 1841, let's go to the next one. There is a exchange in which Poe proposes a joint project with Washington Irving. And he says, "Mr. George R. Graham of this city, Philadelphia, and myself designed to establish a monthly magazine upon certain conditions, one of which is the procuring your assistance in the enterprise." Now, what he meant was that he wanted Irving to join him in writing for the magazine. And he says, "I need not call your attention to the sign of the times in respect to magazine literature. You will admit the tendency of the age in this direction. The brief, the terse, the condensed, and the easily circulated will take place of the diffuse, the ponderous, and the inaccessible. Even our reviews are found too massive for the taste of the day. I do not mean for the taste of the merely uneducated, but also for that of the few. In the meantime, the finest minds of Europe are beginning to lend their spirit to magazines. In this country, unhappily, we have not any journal of the class which either can afford to offer pecuniary inducement to the highest talent, or which would be in all respects a fitting vehicle for its thoughts. In the supply of this deficiency, there would be a point gained, and the project of which I speak has originated in the hope of supplying it." Okay, so the point I want to establish is simply that they knew each other, that they respected each other, that Poe had based one of his major stories on a Irving story, and that they had a mutual subject, which was Lord Byron. And so what we're going to do tonight is we're going to take up one of Irving's stories, which will, I think, easily underscore the mental connection between these two writers. Is called The Ghost, The Devil, and Thomas Walker. So let's start with that. Now, Jose, I'd like you to start us off. And we've got, I believe, 4 readers, including myself. So let's get started. We'll need one voice, by the way, besides yours at one point in the story. That may have to be Kynan when there's an exchange. So.
Sure, no problem. Okay, The Devil and Tom Walker. And we're just going right into A Few Miles, right? I'm not reading.
Right.
Not reading. Okay. A few miles from Boston in Massachusetts, there is a deep inlet winding several miles into the interior of the country from Charles Bay and terminating in a thickly wooded swamp or morass. On one side of this inlet is a beautiful dark grove. On the opposite side, the land rises abruptly from the water's edge into a high ridge, on which grow a few scattered oaks of great age and immense size. Under one of these gigantic trees, according to old stories, there was a great amount of treasure buried by Kidd the pirate. The inlet allowed a facility to bring the money in a boat secretly and at night to the very foot of the hill. The elevation of the place permitted a good lookout to be kept that no one was at hand, while the remarkable trees formed good landmarks by which the place might easily be found again. The old stories add, moreover, that the devil presided at the hiding of the money and took it under his guardianship. But this, it is well known, he always does with buried treasure, particularly when it has been ill-gotten. Be that as it may, Kidd never returned to recover his wealth, being shortly after seized at Boston, sent out to England, and there hanged for a pirate. All right. Oh, wow. Nice images here. Okay. About the year 1727, just at the time that earthquakes were prevalent in New England and shook many tall sinners down upon their knees, there lived near this place a meagerly fellow of the name of Tom Walker. He had a wife as miserly as himself. They were so miserly that they even conspired to cheat each other. Whatever the woman could lay hands on, she hid away. A hen could not cackle, but she was on the alert to secure the new laid egg. Her husband was continually prying about to detect her secret hoards, and many and fierce were the conflicts that took place about what ought to have been common property. They lived in a forlorn-looking house that stood alone and had an air of starvation. A few straggling savin trees, emblems of sterility, grew near it. No smoke ever curled from its chimney. No traveler stopped at its door. A miserable horse, whose ribs were as articulate as the bars of a gridiron, stalked about a field where a thin carpet of moss, scarcely covering the ragged beds of pudding stone, tantalized and balked his hunger. And sometimes he would lean his head over the fence, look piteously at the passer-by, and seem to petition deliverance from this land of famine. The house and its inmates had altogether a bad name. Tom's wife was a tall termagant. Termagant. Oh, there's a note here. Okay, termagant, a quarrelsome, scolding woman. Okay. Tom's wife was a tall termagant, fierce of temper, loud of tongue, and strong of arm. Her voice was often heard in a wordy warfare with her husband, and his face sometimes showed signs that their conflicts were not confined to words. No one ventured, however, to interfere between them. The lonely wayfarer shrunk within himself at the horrid clamor and clapper clawing, eyed the den of discord askance, and hurried on his way, rejoicing, if a bachelor, in his celibacy. One day that Tom Walker had been to a distant part of the neighborhood, he took what he considered a shortcut homeward, through the swamp. Like most shortcuts, it was an ill-chosen route. The swamp was thickly grown with great, gloomy pines and hemlocks, some of them 90 feet high, which made it dark at noonday, and a retreat for all the owls of the neighborhood. It was full of pits and quagmires, partly covered with weeds and mosses, where the green surface often betrayed the traveler into a gulf of black, smothering mud. There were also dark and stagnant pools, the abodes of the tadpole, the bullfrog, and the water snake, where the trunks of pine and hemlocks lay half drowned, half rotting, looking like alligators sleeping in the mire. Tom had long been picking his way cautiously through this treacherous forest, stepping from tuft to tuft of rushes and roots, which afforded precarious footholds among deep sloughs, or pacing carefully, like a cat, along the prostrate trunks of trees, startled now and then by the sudden screaming of the bittern or the quacking of wild duck rising on the wind from some solitary pool. At length, he arrived at a firm piece of ground which ran out like a peninsula into the deep bosom of the swamp. It had been one of the strongholds of the Indians during their wars with the first colonists. Okay. It had been one of the strongholds of the Indians during their wars with the first colonists. Here they had thrown up a kind of fort which they had looked upon almost as impregnable, and had used as a place of refuge for their squaws and children. Nothing remained of the old Indian fort but a few embankments, gradually sinking to the level of the surrounding earth, and already overgrown in part by oaks and other forest trees, the foliage of which formed the contrast to the dark pines and hemlocks of the swamp. It was late in the dusk of evening when Tom Walker reached the old fort, and he paused there a while to rest himself. Anyone but he would have felt unwilling to linger in this lonely, melancholy place, for the common people had a bad opinion of it, from the stories handed down from the time of the Indian wars, when it was asserted that the savages held incantations here and had made sacrifices to the evil spirit. Tom Walker, however, was not a man to be troubled with any fears of the kind. He reposed himself for some time on the trunk of a fallen hemlock, listening to the boding cry of the tree toad, and delving with his walking staff into a mound of black mold at his feet. As he turned up the soil unconsciously, his staff struck against something hard. He raked it out of the vegetable mold, and lo, a cloven skull with an Indian tomahawk buried deep in it lay before him. The rust on the weapon showed the time that had elapsed since this death blow had been given. It was a dreary memento of the fierce struggle that had taken place in this last foothold of the Indian warriors. Should we get another voice here?
Yeah, let's have Kynan be that, and I'll be the devil. Okay, which you'll see in a minute.
Talk about spoilers. Okay, can you Kynan talk? Can you hear Kynan?
Yeah, hello.
Yes, we can hear him.
Okay, good. Go ahead. So let's keep going here.
Said
Tom Walker as he gave it a kick to shake the dirt from it.
Let that skull alone,
said a gruff voice. Tom lifted up his eyes and beheld a great black man seated directly opposite him on the stump of a tree. He was exceedingly surprised, having neither heard nor seen anyone approach, and he was still more perplexed on observing, as well as the gathering gloom would permit, that the stranger was neither Negro nor Indian. It is true he was dressed in a rude half-Indian garb and had a red belt or sash swathed around his body, but his face was neither black nor copper color, but swarthy and dingy, and begrimed with soot, as if he had been accustomed to toil among fires and forges. He had a shock of coarse black hair that stood out from his head in all directions and bore an axe on his shoulder. He scowled for a moment at Tom with a pair of great red eyes.
"What are you doing on my grounds?"
said the black man with a hoarse, growling voice.
your grounds.
Said Tom with a sneer.
No more your grounds than mine. They belong to Deacon Peabody.
"Deacon Peabody be damned,"
said the stranger.
"as I flatter myself he will be, if he does not look more to his own sins and less to those of his neighbors. Look yonder and see how Deacon Peabody is faring."
Tom looked in the direction that the stranger pointed and beheld one of the great trees, fair and flourishing without, but rotten at the core, and saw that it had been nearly hewn through, so that the first high wind was likely to blow it down. On the bark of the tree was scored the name of Deacon Peabody, an eminent man who had waxed wealthy by driving shrewd bargains with the Indians. He now looked around and found most of the tall trees marked with the name of some great man of the colony, and all more or less scored by the axe. The one on which he had been seated, and which had evidently just been hewn down, bore the name of Crowninshield, and he recollected a mighty rich man of that name, who made a vulgar display of wealth, which it was whispered he had acquired by buccaneering.
"He's just ready for burning,"
said the black man with a growl of triumph.
"You see, I am likely to have a good stock of firewood for winter."
But what right have you
said Tom,
to cut down Deacon Peabody's timber?
"The right of a prior claim,"
said the other.
"This woodland belonged to me long before one of your white-faced race put foot upon the soil."
And pray, who are you, if I may be so bold?
said Tom.
"Oh, I go by various names. I am the wild huntsman in some countries, the black miner in others. In this neighborhood, I am he to whom the red men consecrated this spot, and in honor of whom they now and then roasted a white man by way of sweet-smelling sacrifice. Since the red men have been exterminated by you white savages, I amuse myself by presiding at the persecutions of Quakers and Anabaptists. I am the great patron and prompter of slave dealers, and the Grand Master of the Salem witches?
The upshot of all which is that, if I mistake not,
said Tom sturdily.
you are he commonly called Old Scratch.
The same, at your service,
replied the black man with a half-civil nod. Such was the opening of this interview, according to the old story, though it has almost too familiar an air to be credited. One would think that to meet with such a singular personage in this wild, lonely place would have shaken any man's nerves. But Tom was a hard-minded fellow, not easily daunted, and he had lived so long with a termagant wife that he did not even fear the devil. It is said that after this commencement, they had a long and earnest conversation together. As Tom returned homeward, the black man told him of great sums of money buried by Kidd the pirate under the oak trees on the high ridge not far from the morass. All of these were under his command and protected by his power, so that none could find them but such as propitiated his favor. These he offered to place within Tom Walker's reach, having conceived an especial kindness for him, but they were to be had only on certain conditions. What these conditions were may be easily surmised, though Tom never disclosed them publicly. They must have been very hard, for he required time to think of them, and he was not a man to stick at trifles when money was in view. When they had reached the edge of the swamp, the stranger paused.
What proof have I that all you have been telling me is true?
Said Tom.
There's my signature,
said the black man, pressing his finger on Tom's forehead. So saying, he turned off among the thickets of the swamp and seemed, as Tom said, to go down, down, down into the earth until nothing but his head and shoulders could be seen, and so on until he totally disappeared. When Tom reached home, he found the black print of a finger burnt, as it were, into his forehead, which nothing could obliterate. The first news his wife had to tell him was the sudden death of Absalom, Crowninshield, the rich buccaneer. It was announced in the papers with the usual flourish that a great man had fallen in Israel. Tom recollected the tree which his black friend had just hewn down and which he was ready for burning. Let the freebooter roast. Oh, shit. Sorry, that's you. So go ahead. Sorry.
Let the freebooter roast,
said Tom.
Who cares?
He now felt convinced that all he had heard and seen was no illusion. He was not prone to let his wife into confidence, but as this was an uneasy secret, he willingly shared it with her. All her avarice was awakened at the mention of hidden gold, and she urged her husband to comply with the black man's the black man's terms and secure what would make them wealthy for life. However, Tom might have felt disposed to sell himself to the devil. He was determined not to do so to oblige his wife, so he flatly refused, out of the mere spirit of contradiction. Many and bitter were the quarrels they had on the subject, but the more she talked, the more resolute was Tom not to be damned to please her.
One thing, Jose, let me just say, because you might, when you get tired, you got also Ashley. So maybe you could have Kynan switch off and be you. Ashley can take the other role, or Ashley can come in. Just saying. So whenever you want to switch, I'm just telling you.
Okay, what I'll do is I'll read one more paragraph and then we can switch off. Maybe I'll have Ashley take over my role just to keep it consistent. Great. At length, she determined to drive the bargain on her own account. And if she succeeded to keep all the gain to herself, being on the same fearless temper as her husband, she set off for the old Indian fort towards the close of a summer's day. She was many hours absent. When she came back, she was reserved and sullen in her replies. She spoke something of a black man whom she met about the twilight hoeing at the root of a tall tree. He was sulky, however, and would not come to terms. She was to go again with a proprietary offering, but what it was she forbore to say. All right, so I'm going to bring in Ashley. All right, Ashley, you ready to take over?
Yes.
We're at the next evening.
Okay. The next evening, she set off again for the swamp with her apron heavily laden. Tom waited and waited for her, but in vain. Midnight came, but she did not make her appearance. Morning, noon, night returned, but still she did not come. Tom now grew uneasy for her safety, especially as he found she had carried off in her apron the silver teapot and spoons and every portable article of value. Another night elapsed. Another morning came, but no wife. In a word, she was never heard of more. What was her real fate, nobody knows, in consequence of so many pretending to know. It is one of those facts which have become confounded by a variety of historians. Some asserted that she lost her way among the tangled mazes of the swamp and sank into some pit or slough. Others, more uncharitable, hinted that she had eloped with the household booty and made off to some other province, while others surmised that the tempter had decoyed her into a dismal quagmire, on top of which her hat was found lying. In confirmation of this, it was said a great black man with an axe on his shoulder was seen late that very evening, coming out of the swamp, carrying a bundle tied in a check apron with an air of surly triumph. The most current and probable story, however, observes that Tom Walker grew so anxious about the fate of his wife and his property that he set out at length to seek them both at the Indian fort. During a long summer's afternoon, he searched about the gloomy place, but no wife was to be seen. He called her name repeatedly, but she was nowhere to be heard. The bittern alone responded to his voice as they flew screaming by, or the bullfrog croaked dolefully from a neighboring pool. At length, it is said, just in the brown hour of twilight, when the owls began to hoot and the bats to flit about, his attention was attracted by the clamor of carrion crows hovering about a cypress tree. He looked up and beheld a bundle tied in a check apron and hanging in the branches of the tree, with a great vulture perched hard by, as if keeping watch upon it. He leaped with joy, for he recognized his wife's apron and supposed it to contain the household valuables. Let us get hold of the property, said
That's one of the kind, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, sorry. Let us get hold of the property,
Said he consolingly to himself.
and we will endeavor to do without the woman.
As he scrambled up the tree, the vulture spread its wide wings and sailed off screaming into the deep shadows of the forest. Tom seized the checked apron, but woeful sight, found nothing but a heart and liver tied up in it. Such, according to this most authentic old story, was all that was to be found of Tom's wife. She had probably attempted to deal with the black man as she had been accustomed to deal with her husband. But though a female scold is generally considered a match for the devil, yet in this instance she appears to have had the worst of it. He must have died game, however, for it is said Tom noticed many prints of cloven feet stamped upon the tree, and found handfuls of hair that looked as if they had been plucked from the coarse black shock of the woodman. Tom knew his wife's prowess by experience. He shrugged his shoulders as he looked at the signs of fierce clapper clawing. Okay.
Egad.
Oh, wait, yeah, sorry.
Egad.
Said he to himself.
Old Scratch must have had a tough time of it.
Tom consoled himself for the loss of his property with the loss of his wife, for he was a man of fortitude. He even felt something like gratitude towards the black woodman who, he considered, had done him a kindness. He sought, therefore, to cultivate a further acquaintance with him, but for some time without success. The old blacklegs played shy, for whatever people may think, he is not always to be had for calling for. He knows how to play his cards when pretty sure of his game. At length, it is said, when delay had whetted Tom's eagerness to the quick and prepared him to agree to anything rather than not gain the promised treasure, he met the black man one evening in his usual woodman's dress with his axe on his shoulder, sauntering along the swamp and humming a tune. He affected to receive Tom's advances with great indifference, made brief replies, and went on humming his tune. By degrees, however, Tom brought him to do business, and they began to haggle about the terms on which the former was to have the pirate's treasure. There was one condition which need not be mentioned, being generally understood in all cases where the devil grants favors, but there were others about which, though of less importance, he was inflexibly obstinate. He insisted that the money found through his means should be employed in his service. He proposed, therefore, that Tom should employ it in the black traffic, that is to say, that he should fit out a slave ship. This, however, Tom resolutely refused. He was bad enough in all conscience, but the devil himself could not tempt him to turn slave trader. Finding Tom so squeamish on this point, he did not insist upon it, but proposed instead that he should turn usurer, the devil being extremely anxious for the increase of usurers, looking upon them as his peculiar people. To this no objections were made, for it was just to Tom's taste.
You shall open a broker's shop in Boston next month,
Said the black man.
I'll do it tomorrow if you wish.
Said Tom Walker.
You shall lend money at 2% a month.
Egad, I'll charge 4.
Replied Tom Walker.
You shall extort bonds, foreclose mortgages, drive the merchants to bankruptcy.
I'll drive them to the devil?
Yeah.
Cried Tom Walker.
You are the usurer for my money.
Said Blacklegs with delight.
When will you want the rhino?
This very night.
What is the rhino? Anybody see the note there? Can you
Yeah,
read it?
that on the bottom note, it's footnote 14. It says it's a slang term for money. So he says, when do you want the money?
Okay.
I'm going to start using that.
Rhino. Okay, right. And you already said this very night, right?
Yeah.
Done.
Said the devil.
Done.
Said Tom Walker. So they shook hands and struck a bargain.
You guys want to alternate, or you okay?
Yeah, I can go back to narrating.
Okay, because we just want to alternate, so we keep it moving. That's good.
All right, here we go. All right, Ashley, I'll bring you back in if we need to switch again. Okay. All right. We were at his reputation, right?
Yeah.
A few days right.
Yeah.
A few days' time saw Tom Walker seated behind his desk in a counting house in Boston. A counting house is an office which a business firm conducts its bookkeeping, correspondence, and similar activities. His reputation for a readied, moneyed man who would lend money out for a good consideration soon spread abroad. Everybody remembers the time of Governor Belcher when money was particularly scarce. It was a time of paper credit. The country had been deluged with government bills. The famous land bank had been established. There had been a rage for speculating. The people had run mad with schemes for new settlements, for building cities in the wilderness. Land jobbers went about with maps of grants and townships and Eldorados, lying nobody knew where, but which everybody was ready to purchase. In a word, the great speculating fever, which breaks out every now and then in the country, had raged to an alarming degree, and everybody was dreaming of making sudden fortunes from nothing. As usual, the fever had subsided, the dream had gone off, and the imaginary fortunes with it. The patients were left in doleful plight, and the whole country resounded with the consequent cry of hard times. At this propitious time of public distress, did Tom Walker set up as a usurer in Boston. His door, his door was soon thronged by customers, the needy and adventurous, the gambling speculator, the dreaming land jobber, the thriftless tradesman, the merchant with cracked credit. In short, everyone driven to raise money by desperate means and desperate sacrifices hurried to Tom Walker. Thus, Tom was the universal friend of the needy and acted like a friend in need. That is to say, he always exacted good pay and good security. In proportion to the distress of the applicant was the hardness of his terms. He accumulated bonds and mortgages, gradually squeezed his customers closer and closer, and sent them at length dry as a sponge from his door. In this way, he made money hand over hand, became a rich and mighty man, and exalted his cocked hat upon change. I'll just read the note. Change proudly raised himself to a position of importance as a trader on the stock exchange. He built himself, as usual, a vast house out of ostentation, but left the greater part of it unfinished and unfurnished out of parsimony. He even set up a carriage in the fullness of his vain glory, though he nearly starved the horses which drew it. And as the ungreased wheels groaned and screeched on the axle trees, you would have thought you heard the souls of the poor debtors he was squeezing. As Tom waxed old, however, he grew thoughtful. Having secured the good things of this world, he began to feel anxious about those of the next. He thought with regret on the bargain he had made with his black friend and set his wits to work to cheat him out of the conditions. He became, therefore, all of a sudden, a violent churchgoer. He prayed loudly and strenuously, as if heaven were to be taken by force of lungs. Indeed, one might always tell when he had sinned most during the week by the clamor of his Sunday devotion. The quiet Christians who had been modestly and steadfastly traveling Zionward were struck with self-reproach at seeing themselves so suddenly outstripped in their career by this new-made convert. Tom was as rigid in religious as in money matters. He was a stern supervisor and censorer of his neighbors, and seemed to think every sin entered up to their account became a credit on his own side of the page. He even talked of the expediency of reviving the persecution of Quakers and Anabaptists. In a word, Tom's zeal became as notorious as his riches. Still, in spite of all this strenuous attention to forms, Tom had a lurking dread that the devil, after all, would have his due, that he might not be taken unawares. Therefore, it is said he always carried a small Bible in his coat pocket. He had also a great folio Bible on his counting house desk and would frequently be found reading it when people called on business. On such occasion, he would lay his green spectacles in the book to mark the place while he turned round to drive some usurious bargain. Some say that Tom grew a little crack-brained in his old days, and that fancying his end approaching, he had his horse new shod, saddled, and bridled, and buried with his feet uppermost, because he supposed that at the last day the world would be turned upside down, in which case he should find his horse standing ready for mounting. And he was determined at the worst to give his old friend a run for it. This, however, is probably a mere old wives' fable. If he really did take such precaution, it was totally superfluous. At least, so say the authentic old legend, which closes his story in the following manner. One hot summer afternoon in the dog days, just as terrible black thunder gust was coming up, Tom sat in his counting house, in his white linen cap and Indiana silk morning gown. He was on the point of foreclosing a mortgage by which he would complete the ruin of an unlucky land speculator for whom he had professed the greatest friendship. The poor land jobber begged him to grant a few months' indulgence. Tom had grown testy and irritated and refused another day. You want to be the land jobber, kind of?
Sure. My family will be
Maybe
ruined.
I better do it because he's got to be Tom, right?
Okay. Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. My family will be ruined and brought upon the parish,
said the land jobber.
Charity begins at home,
replied Tom.
I must take care of myself in these hard times.
You have made so much money out of me.
said the speculator. Tom lost his patience and his piety,
The devil take me
said he.
if I have made a farthing.
Just then there were 3 loud knocks at the street door. He stepped out to see who was there. A black man was holding a black horse, which neighed and stamped with impatience.
Tom, you're come for.
Said the black fellow gruffly. Tom shrank back, but too late. He had left his little Bible at the bottom of his coat pocket and his big Bible on the desk buried under the mortgage he was about to foreclose. Never was a sinner taken more unawares. The black man whisked him like a child into the saddle. Gave the horse the lash, and away he galloped, with Tom on his back in the midst of the thunderstorm. The clerks struck their pens behind their ears and stared after him from the windows. Away went Tom Walker, dashing down the streets, his white cap bobbing up and down, his morning gown fluttering in the wind, and his steed striking fire out of the pavement at every bound. When the clerks turned to look for the black man, he had disappeared. Tom Walker never returned to foreclose the mortgage. A countryman who had lived on the border of the swamp reported that in the height of the thunder gust he had heard a great clattering of hoofs and a howling along the road, and running to the window caught sight of a figure such as I have described on a horse that galloped like mad across the fields, over the hills, and down into the black hemlock swamp toward the old Indian fort, and that shortly after a thunderbolt falling in that direction seemed to set the whole forest in a blaze. The good people of Boston shook their heads, shrugged their shoulders, but had been so much accustomed to witches and goblins and tricks of the devil in all kinds of shapes from the first settlement of the colony that they were not so much horror-struck as might have been expected. Trustees were appointed to take charge of Tom's effects. There was nothing, however, to administer upon. On searching his coffers, all his bonds and mortgages were found reduced to cinders. In place of gold and silver, his iron chest was filled with chips and shavings. 2 skeletons lay in his stable instead of his half-starved horses, and the very next day his great house took fire and burnt to the ground. Such was the end of Tom Walker and his ill-gotten wealth. Let all gripping money brokers lay this story to heart. The truth of it is not to be doubted. The very hole under the oak trees whence he dug kids' money is to be seen to this day, and the neighboring swamp, an old Indian fort, are often haunted in stormy nights by a figure on horseback, in morning gown and white cap, which is doubtless the troubled spirit of the usurer. In fact, the story has resolved itself into a proverb so prevalent throughout New England of the devil and Tom Walker.
Okay.
Wow.
That was great.
Right. So,
That was good.
so I have to comment next week because I think you've got to get going.
Just one quick question, Dennis. This Captain Kidd they're talking about is the same Captain Kidd from the Gold Bug, right?
Exactly.
Interesting.
Exactly. It's the same themes, and we can discuss that next week a bit when we open up. But I want to thank everybody for joining the story. Much more could be said, but because of time considerations and the fact that Jose will be doing something in 5 more minutes, right? You may want to
Exactly.
just that.
Yeah, in fact, go to Diane Sayers' YouTube channel and the LaRouche Organization's YouTube channel. You will be able to see me live. In fact, I might even share it on my social media too, so if you follow me on there. I don't see any comments or questions, except one person in Ireland saying hello. So that's good. Thank you kindly. I hope if you were here to harass us or to hate on us, I hope you enjoyed the story just as much as I did. So with that being said, I'd like to end the stream, and I'll see you in 5 minutes on Diane Sayers' YouTube channel. So check me out there. All right, and we are ending.